let's start. I think we've got quite a few people here, so we're going to talk today about error correction. So let's begin. Okay. As I mentioned before, you will receive a certificate of participation and a webinar handout in the next few days. It might not come out immediately, but you'll get it in the next few days. If you don't, just send me an email at that email address. I will get it out to you, so don't panic. Check your spam though, because occasionally sometimes these go to spam. But you know, if you don't get it, I'll get it to you within 24 hours of you sending me an email. Okay, often quicker. By the way, all of the material in this is in a handout that we'll receive. So don't worry about the slides. You'll get this and a lot more, including lots of useful links and videos that we've found for you. Anyway, this is our fourth in this year's or this academic year's season of refresher webinars. We're going to be talking about error correction in English as second language lessons. I'm sure as we all are language teachers, I think we play a pivotal role in guiding learners towards proficiency. And so error correction's a cornerstone of this journey. So it's not just about pointing out mistakes. Okay, we're also nurturing their growth, boosting their confidence. So, you know, if we're doing it correctly, okay, and creating an environment where errors are viewed as stepping stones to mastery. So I think we're going to be looking a bit how, you know, if they're not going to make errors, if they're scared to make errors, then really not going to progress. Okay, so you've got to, you know, learning a language means making errors, and, you know, making errors in lessons means being corrected. We'll be looking about where these errors come from and how, when, and if to focus on them. So some errors maybe at certain times. If you're promoting fluency, you may want to let them go. Okay? But in other times, you may want to focus on them. There's time for immediate correction, time for correction at a later stage. Although these tools we look at can be applied in all lessons, we're particularly focusing on speaking production. Okay? Because, I mean, this is, you know, I think we all know how to correct written things, okay? Although there are, you know, a lot of methods there as well. But, you know, sometimes instead of just correcting a student saying that's wrong, there's often better ways. Okay? So we're going to have a look in a future webinar maybe about correcting mistakes in writing. In fact, we did look at some of this when we looked at writing about a key for error corrections. Anyway, for most of this, I think I'll hand over to Kathy. Okay? She's planned most of this, and I'll be there monitoring the chat.
Thank you. So the objectives of the session today are that we will understand students' errors much better. We'll be better able to choose how and when to focus on errors, and most importantly, better able to guide students to pick up on their own errors and really giving them more autonomy over their own learning and making them a bit more reflective about their own production, which is great. So to begin, we're going to start with a little quiz. And the quiz looks at lots of different errors and how we can kind of define what these errors are.
So you're going to need to write in the chat, even just a number, okay? So let me know in the chat what you think the type of error this is.
So this is coming from a B2 level student. The student is talking about reading an upsetting piece of news. And what they say is, it's just terrific news, isn't it? What type of mistake is this? Is this a transfer from their first language? Is this an incidental error? Or is it an overgeneralization, for example, of a rule? What do you guys think?
I think we're getting a lot of people, but a lot of people saying A. Who was it? Roberta said it's a false friend. Yeah.
Exactly. This one is definitely A. So it's a transfer from their first language, which in this case it is the false friend of terrific. Other examples of this that I think are very common, and I think we will focus a lot on Italian speakers today because we're mostly, I think most people here are teaching Italian students, is when they say things like, if it will rain. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that's how you would say it in Italian. Instead of saying if it rains, they often come out with if it will rain.
Yeah,
this is
things
their
like conditionals
transfer of a rule.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Conditionals, and as we said before, like present perfect often is a bit of the difference between present perfect and past simple is one of these things where Italian sometimes can confuse students.
Okay, next one. This comes from an A2 level student who's describing their parents' jobs. They say, my mum's a teacher and my dad's a cooker. A, B, or C, the same ones we have. A transfer from the first language, an incidental error, or an overgeneralization.
Obviously, we're talking about the fact that cooker is not what you'd call someone who cooks. Got a bit of a mix here. People split between A and C. Just know.
Here, I would say it's an overgeneralization, especially at this level where they've learned this ER. A teacher teaches, a singer sings, a driver drives, and so a cooker cooks. But of course, we wouldn't say cooker here. But what they're doing is they've learned something in the English language and they're applying it as a rule. And that's, a really common mistake that students make, especially at this level here.
Other things might be, for example, making past simple verbs regular when they're not regular, things like that, or things like that.
Okay, next one. Here we have a B1 level student, and the student is talking to a friend about the weekend, and they say, my mum's been learning to play chess, and now he can beat me. What's the mistake here at a B1 level?
Pretty much everyone's saying B.
Exactly, especially here, as we can see, if they're using the present perfect continuous here, I don't think this is someone that's having problems with pronouns, of course. And we make these kind of mistakes if we're tired or distracted,
Exactly.
often with pronouns or prepositions as well, before and after, things like this. Okay, let's have a look at some different types of mistakes. This one is coming from a B2 level student talking about their dreams. I want to grow up my kids abroad. So this mistake here, is it an avoidance of an element that doesn't exist in their first language? Is it a concept issue? Or is it a conscious mistake to convey meaning, to continue the conversation?
People are generally saying A with a couple of C's in there.
Here the problem is the phrasal verb, grow up. And so they're trying to convey something to us, but using the wrong word because they don't fully understand the meaning, where what they should be saying is raise or bring up. And so here the problem is understanding the meaning of those different words. So it's a concept issue. And it's really, really common as like a developmental issue because they're trying out all this new language and they've learned these new words or phrases or structures, but don't fully understand the meaning yet.
Yeah.
So what we have here is a concept issue.
I guess using an intransitive verb as a transitive verb there to a certain extent. For one, it might have a similar meaning.
Yeah. Other mistakes, words like unless, I think, cause a lot of problems here because again it doesn't fully translate into Italian that well. Like I could say, unless I study, I won't pass the test. And here the concept of unless is quite hard for students to grasp if it doesn't exist in their own language.
Gaetano asked, what's the difference between error and mistake? I think in this webinar, I think we're probably using them interchangeably. I guess in a sense, when you make a mistake, it doesn't necessarily, I don't know if it's something you do in your life. It's probably we use mistake a bit more, whereas errors for exercises and things like that. But I don't think we're going to be. I don't know, Kathy. Did you have any difference in meaning here? I think we're just.
No, I mean we're using them like that. Yeah, like some people do like to kind of define the two differently, but they're as different things. But we're just using them kind of in a similar way here. Okay. Next one, we have a B1 level student is trying to tell you some news. And they say, the name of the new puppy of the friend of my dad is Fluffy. What's the mistake here? Is it avoidance of an element that doesn't exist in the first language, a concept issue, or a conscious mistake to convey meaning?
Everyone seems to be saying A, as far as I can see.
I think this is my pet peeve in the classroom. These long sentences that sound quite awkward in English, especially with the of like this. Because of course in English we would flip the whole thing. My dad's friends' puppies' names, Fluffy.
A big string of genitives there, yeah. But yeah, I think it's one of those things where, look, in certain situations you might be able to use this of form and a genitive interchangeably, or maybe with a difference in register. Right? I always think of the difference between London's streets, or the streets of London. The streets of London always sounds like a song. I think it is a song. Okay, but something you might name a poem or a book or something like that. Whereas you talk about, walking down London streets.
Yeah, true. The register.
Both of them can be there, but we very rarely say of a person.
Other common avoidance strategies are things like saying, I started studying 2 years ago, instead of I've been studying for 2 years, which I think is the natural way of expressing that. But many learners will resort to using the past simple instead.
Mona asks is a question about genitives. Look, I don't want to get too distracted a little bit there, because we could go into correcting errors there. We might have a look at some actual grammar errors in another webinar, but we want to have a look more, pass on to it more of error correction.
Yes, that's okay. Final little quiz question. This is an adult student with an A1 level who's discussing jobs in their country. And they say, in my country, a vet takes a low salary. What's the mistake here?
Okay, we're getting a lot of C's there.
Yeah, exactly. And here, it's actually quite clever. They know that they haven't learnt the word earn yet, but they're finding a way to continue the conversation because they don't want communication to break down. Still a mistake, but would you pull them up on that mistake?
I always sort of encourage my students often to make those sort of leaps. You know, if they don't know how to say something, try and say it. I'll probably understand.
Yeah, exactly. And so there are lots and lots of different ways to kind of organize and define and talk about mistakes or errors. These are just some of them. And we're looking at them really to look at the kind of mistakes that we should focus on as teachers and draw attention to, and the ones that perhaps we don't need to. So if your student is tired or distracted and they make an incidental error, do we really need to focus on that mistake there? Similarly, as students are trying really hard to communicate and continue conversation, and they find a solution with a different word, do we need to focus on those conscious mistakes?
At least we could even, you know, just keep that in mind and deal with it later. You know, then we can say, oh, okay, obviously doesn't know the word earn. Look at that, but instead of pulling them up on it at that moment.
Exactly, yeah, I fully agree. So, which mistakes to focus on and how? Mistakes that are relevant to all of the students. As teachers, we are always short of time in class, and we couldn't possibly focus on all the mistakes we heard throughout the lesson. We should focus on the ones that most students can learn from. The mistakes that everybody is going to get something from. Intelligibility, only when the mistake affects general meaning or the global comprehension of what is being expressed is at risk. This is because we discourage students from attempting to use complex language if we point out all of their mistakes every time. High frequency mistakes. Common mistakes we expect at their current level. We should focus on the language we expect our students to be producing within their current level. Just like the example of the A1 student not being able to, not knowing the word earn. If they're making an effort to use complex structures or finding a solution, perhaps let those mistakes slide.
Mm.
So how? Now we're going to have a look at lots of different techniques of error correction. And all of the techniques that we're looking at have this guided approach. So what is a guided approach to error correction? Where the teacher guides students to the corrections, but won't tell them explicitly how to correct it. Learners must work out the rules for themselves. What are the benefits of a guided approach? Well, it promotes active engagement. They are actively involved in analyzing their own language errors, which can lead to deeper understanding and retention of language rules, instead of passively receiving the correct answers every single time. It fosters critical thinking. Thinking critically can help them develop problem-solving skills and a deeper understanding of the language structure. Some of the techniques, a lot of the techniques we're looking at, does this through peer work. Increases learner autonomy. It empowers learners to take ownership of their language learning process. They become more independent and less reliant on the teacher for corrections, which is, of course, what we all want. It helps them to build confidence. When learners identify and correct errors themselves, it boosts their confidence. They gain a sense of accomplishment, which can motivate them to continue learning. It supports long-term retention. Learners who actively engage in the discovery and correction of errors are more likely to remember and apply what they have learned in the long term. It reduces teacher-centeredness. Traditional error correction methods often place the teacher at the center of the learning process. Guided discovery shifts the focus to the learner, making the learner experience more student-centered. They're more in control. And it enhances metacognition. Learners develop metacognitive skills as they reflect on their own language use and errors. This can lead to improved self-monitoring and self-regulation in language learning. So that's just a little bit of theory behind why we should be implementing some of these guided approaches. Let's go ahead and have a look at some of these techniques. So error correction on the spot. The student has said something to you, or you've heard the student saying something to another student, and you feel like you can correct them on the spot. We're going to have a look at a very, I think this has come up, lots of people have already spoke about this kind of avoidance or inability to use the present perfect.
I'm going to play the role of the student here. See, so I would be a student and I say this incorrect sentence, okay? I never went to Disneyland.
And as the teacher, I might say, never went to Disneyland. And I'm highlighting the problem for the student. And then they think, okay, I made a mistake. What was the mistake?
Once you can often get the students to recognize that sort of tone of voice that you have, or, that they, when you repeat something, they'll quite soon get used to that.
Recasting.
I never went to Disneyland.
No, me neither. I've never been to Disneyland either. And here you need a very active student to be able to pick up on that, It's a very natural way of helping students iron out those mistakes. And it's what we do with very, very young children in their first language. When they make mistakes, often the caregiver is there, correcting by recasting what they say.
It's a good way also of, it doesn't humiliate the student in front of the class, or, they just, the student might notice it, the other people might not,
Asking for clarification.
I never went to Disneyland.
What happened? Did it close down? Why can't you go now?
So putting in here the idea of finish time with or finished ability or whatever for past simple. So
yeah, and showing that there's been like a breakdown in the communication. Like, I don't know what you're trying to express because it's not clear from the way you said it. Mm-hmm. Elicitation.
I never went to Disneyland.
Now, are you talking about something that's finished completely? And here again, you're helping them to work out what the problem is that they made by kind of focusing a bit more on the grammar than the meaning when we ask for clarification. Or the metalinguistic route.
I never went to Disneyland.
Now, here, Josh, you use the past simple, when actually we should use the present perfect. Why is that? And here we're talking again about the grammar and reminding them about when to use these different grammar structures. So this is just one of the ways, or some of the ways, that we can start to activate this ability to correct their own mistakes and this interest in their own mistakes. When we feel it's okay to correct them on the spot, this is some of the ways that we can do it. Now we're going to have a look at some other methods. Josh, I'll pass over to you. You know this game very well, and I know it's very popular with students, right?
Yeah, something I've played often with when I teach groups of students. We did talk about this in a webinar we did earlier in the year, like I think it was around January, in about games. So this might be familiar to some people here. Let me know if you've tried it. But it's something, someone taught to me. I put a few touches on it, but It's grammar casino. It's often really good at the end of the class or at the end of the week or at the end of a course. A fun way of doing error correction, checking that the grammar points have been understood by the class. To be honest, not only grammar points, can be spelling and things like that as well, punctuation too. Just a warning, your students will love playing this, so be a bit careful. It's probably best not overindulged. Left to a reward lesson, or if they've been good during the class. It's a really fun way of doing this sort of delayed correction, and you can sort of make a note during the week, during the class, during the course about the errors that the students have been making, and you can come up with some examples. It's usually best to have a few examples already written down, because it can be a little bit difficult to do it at the moment, if you've done 3 or 4. The concept of the game is you divide the students into 2 teams. Okay, so if I've got a class of 20 students, 10 and 10, okay, what they're doing is checking whether English sentences that you write on the board are correct or incorrect. Okay? If the sentence incorrect, they can only win their bet if they correct the error. So sometimes you have to write correct sentences, but occasionally, well, most often you'll probably put sentences with the errors in there. It might take a little while for me to explain because if you miss some steps, it really doesn't work well. Okay, you sort of have to explain to them also the ground rules. So it might be worth doing it with a demo first. Remember that all this text is in the handout, so you'll see it. Anyway, this would be, if you're in a class like that with the whiteboard there, divide the group into 2 groups or divide the class into 2 groups. They can choose their own names. Okay, best to make the groups as equally matched as you can. So see if you can, if you have 2 really good students or 4 really good students, maybe divide them equally between the 2 groups. Okay? They have to nominate each one student in each team as a scribe. That student just has to write. It doesn't mean that they have to do anything special. It just means that there's only one person that really needs to write. Write the names on the board. Okay, so in this case, we got the wolves and the foxes. Explain that each team has £200 in the bank. So this is like a casino. This is the money you've got in your pocket or in chips or whatever. Okay, they can bet in multiples of 10 with a minimum bet of 40 and a maximum of 200. I generally start with that, okay, just to make it a bit exciting. If they want to go too low, 10 is not really interesting enough, okay, at that stage. So make the minimum 40. Obviously, the maximum is the money they've got, okay, obviously when they get more, okay. So you write that on there too, so you have the minimum bet there so that they can see that, okay. Teacher will write a sentence on the board. Each group must decide if the sentence is correct or incorrect, okay, grammatically or whatever it is, okay. They discuss this as a group and then tell the teacher that all they're saying here is whether they think it's correct or incorrect, okay. They don't need to at the moment decide what the error is, okay, although they'll probably be talking about it anyway, okay. If they say it's correct, the teacher puts a tick next to the team name. If they say it's incorrect, a cross goes next to their name. So it doesn't mean that group did it correctly or incorrectly. It just means that they think it's correct. So in this case, the wolves say, oh, I think that's okay. The foxes have decided that it's incorrect. Then we pass on to the next one. Each team must decide how much to bet. So you can write this next to the tick or cross. Okay, so you'll see on the next. The foxes have bet 100. They're really confident. The wolves are not sure, so they've gone for the minimum. Okay. Remember, let me know if you think this is correct or incorrect. Okay, are you part of the wolves or are you part of the foxes? Okay. If both groups said the sentence was correct, Now the teacher reveals if the sentence was correct or incorrect. Okay. So in that case, if they both say it, you don't need to. If they both think it's correct, they're not going to write any correction, obviously. But and so if it's correct and they said it was correct, the teacher adds the amount bet to the group's bank. Okay, then you can play another round. But what's probably more likely to happen is one group or both thinks that the sentence is wrong. Remember that it only takes one person in each group to know it. Okay? But remember that in this way they're also correcting each other. The students become teachers to each other. Okay? The group has to discuss and decide what the correct sentence is. The scribe must then write this, that is the correct one, how they're going to change it, okay, and hand it to the teacher. Okay. Simona said it's similar to grammar option. That's another name for it. So okay, they actually see it known as that, although there may be another one as well. Okay. So
what was the other name? Sorry.
Grammar auction. Okay.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
is that a different thing, or I do remember some people calling this that as well? Okay.
I've not heard that, but it's good to know.
The teacher then writes on the board exactly as written on the paper. So the students give him the paper. So the foxes in this case will give them the paper, and he'll write it exactly. You know, if they haven't corrected all the errors, he'll write it as they've written it. Okay. The teacher, so in this case, they've written he plays tennis on Tuesdays, so they've added in the S. Okay. The teacher must check and ask the group to confirm that this is what they wrote. Okay, that's an important step because a lot of them will say, no, we wanted to write something else. Okay, so you got to confirm that I've written that correctly. Okay, the teacher now puts a tick or cross next to the original sentence. Okay, so in this case, that's incorrect. Okay, so obviously at that stage, the Wolves have lost their money. Okay, so they're down 160. Okay, but the Foxes haven't won yet. Okay, so in this case, now they put a cross next to that. Does anyone know what we've got there? Exactly. Some people have got it there, the incorrect capitalization. Okay. In this case, it's a bit tricky because I've introduced two errors. Okay. And so now the teacher should write the correct one, okay, with the two errors there. I always do it with Tuesday or Thursday because the T, a lowercase t and uppercase T are so different. Won't work with Wednesday because, they might not notice. Okay, but if you wrote the lowercase t, then there's no excuse for them because that doesn't exist in English on days of the week.
Very good point.
And it can be really good introducing these two errors because they, particularly maybe not as a first one like we've done here, but sometimes later on in the game, if one group is getting overconfident, okay, and maybe even one group is far ahead, and you want to make it more competitive again. Okay? Then you adjust the bank and mounts, and you can play another round with another sentence. Okay?
I think as Josh was saying before, that students just love playing this game, but more importantly, they're learning from each other, and the likelihood of them remembering these rules now is much, much higher.
Exactly. They're not going to make that error now that they've lost money on it. We're not playing with real money. Okay.
Lovely.
Just some tips, some things that in my experience I've learned, okay, that ways to make this more interesting or to make it go better. Okay, prepare these sentences. Okay, it's probably better to have a list of them before you start playing the game because on the spot you might might be difficult to get good examples. Okay, they should be based around some grammar points you've studied recently. So you are error correcting. So these are things you've observed or you've studied recently. Don't always give them incorrect sentences. Sometimes put an unexpected correct sentence, okay? Because they might try to correct it, maybe things that are, exceptions in English. Okay? Some question forms where they don't have the auxiliary verb. Okay? or things like this, the second conditional where we can use were. Right? Obviously, in some sentences, you can also use was, but if I was you, we don't say. Okay? So that one could be a good example, and a lot of them will try to correct it. Okay? As I said, don't be afraid to put two errors into the sentence if you want to, if you think they'll notice one, but they won't notice the other. Okay? Obviously, maybe two is the limit. You don't want to go too big. Before you reveal if your sentences are correct or incorrect, ask them for a drum roll. Okay, so all the students. Okay, and then you reveal it. It adds to the sort of show, game show atmosphere. If one team's dominating, change the minimum bet. Okay? Don't be afraid to be cruel. I sometimes, if they have 200 in the bank, I can put a minimum bet of 180, particularly towards the end of the game. Okay? That way, it sort of, gets the other team in. So if one team's, you could put in a really difficult sentence. Okay? It just means no one likes it if one team is dominating too much. Okay, the other team might give up. If one or both teams lose all their money, you can play a bonus round. Okay, write bonus on 100 on the board, just in the middle of the board, and you can point to the students and get them to recite odd or even numbers. So, you say, okay, we're doing 2, 4, 6. That'll be good. Sometimes students who aren't paying attention would just automatically say the next number. So, it'll be like 1, 5. Well, sorry, 1, 3, 5, and then someone will say 6. Okay. Days of the week for lower students, months, stuff like that. Okay? You can go around quickly and point to students. Okay? The first person to make an error, the money goes to the other team. Obviously, you've got to be careful that it's played in good. It's a fun game. You don't want to really, point out people that are making errors, but as long as they know it's fun. Okay? You can also play the last round as an all-in. That is, they have to bet all their money, okay? And you can give a difficult sentence, okay? So it really becomes exciting. Yeah, it's a fun game to play. I think, see how it goes. It can be a really good way of, all the things you've noticed during the week. Okay? Get them to correct them.
Excellent. We have got two more delayed error correction techniques to show you. The first one is a dictation. So choose a short text. I would say roughly 150 words, not much longer than that. Otherwise, it just becomes a very, very lengthy exercise. Print it off once and put it at the front of the class. Now, if that text breaks up, for example, into 3 pieces, it's quite nice to make them clearly 3 separate paragraphs. Split the class into groups with 1 scribe per group, and they need, of course, a pen or pencil and a piece of paper. Each member takes turns to rise, come to the front of the classroom where the text is, read it, memorize as much as possible, return and dictate what they remember to the scribe. And every person in the group has a turn at coming up, reading, coming back, and dictating to the scribe. Stage 3 needs to have a time limit on it, really. Say, for example, you give them 15 minutes. At the end of the 15 minutes, you take away the text from them. Now, here is where the teams have to work together to reread their work, make any edits, check, is it as similar as possible to the text that they read. And this is where they're really learning from each other, because they might say, oh no, it's not how we wrote it here, it should say this, because this is the correct form to use. And this is really how they're learning from each other. Then the teacher can project the text onto the whiteboard or the Leam or whatever you have, so that the students can self-correct. And when they see the full correct text, they're now noticing and realizing what are the mistakes that they've made. but are correcting it themselves. And often students will say, okay, but why is it this? And why is it not that? And there'll always be someone that can explain the rule or the pattern to them there. This technique is fantastic because, as I said before, it encourages peer learning, much like the grammar casino. This approach can be implemented in pairs or small groups, allowing learners to help each other identify and correct errors. Peer interaction can be beneficial for language development, of course, and it's this removing the teacher and making them more autonomous in their learning.
Francesca asks, does the original text have to contain errors?
No.
No, I think the idea is that they get introduced when they're dictated.
Yeah, exactly. The errors come up when they're dictating to the scribe. Yeah, great question. Thank you. It's a great type of formative assessment as the students are in stage 4. They're editing the work. They're talking about the mistakes, or they're correcting it in stage 5. The teacher can see what areas students are still struggling with or have already mastered. So if you choose a text that, for example, has a lot of the present perfect or present perfect continuous in it, how have they done with that? Have they mastered that? Are they able to remember it and understand the meaning in the text and dictate it to the scribe? If not, perhaps that's something you need to revise again in the course.
Elizabeth asks, is the scribe the only student who doesn't have to read the text?
Yes. Yeah, so in this exercise, definitely there's an imbalance there in the group, but because in stage 4 and 5 they're working together, all students gain equally from seeing their own mistakes, helping each other correct the mistakes, stuff like this. And if you did it 2 or 3 times over the course of a full course, you'd make sure that course, the scribe is different each time. And this technique really encourages a growth mindset, because by viewing errors as opportunities for learning and improvement rather than as failures, learners are more likely to develop a growth mindset, which is conducive to language learning. So what we're doing here is removing the teacher and the red pen and all of the corrections, all of the work. And we're saying, okay, that was a mistake, but what have we learned from that mistake? So in the handout that you'll get at the end of the webinar, we have 2 dictations that you can use in your classroom. I think one of them does focus on the present perfect continuous, as in it has a lot of those structures in there, and the other one focuses on linkers. It's a text full of different linkers. Both of which were created using ChatGPT, actually, and we're going to have a webinar, a couple of webinars in November, all about how to use ChatGPT to create these types of texts, for example, and lots of other things that you can do with ChatGPT. But you'll find these two texts that you can use for dictations in your class in the handout.
I think Elizabeth has just asked again about the scribe. I think just to clarify, I think the scribe is not anyone particularly important. It's just in I think the first stages, okay, so that we have the other students going up. One of the students has to be there to write, okay, and the idea is that the errors get introduced because they either forget what they're coming back with. Maybe they introduce errors when they're speaking. Maybe it's even errors of the scribe. Okay? But then after that, they all check it. Okay? Is that correct? It's not just the scribe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Stages 4 and 5, they have to work together, reading the text together before they believe that it's complete, as good as they can get it. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could change the scribe every time a team member comes to the front to read and memorize the text. You could change the scribe so that all members of the team get an opportunity to read the text. But I just think it goes much more smoothly if you keep the same scribe for this exercise.
Yes.
For time, the limitations on time as well. Okay, the next one is kind of similar, and the best way to show you this is to give an example. So I'm going to read out a sentence, and I would like you to write it into the chat. So I'll read out the sentence. Don't start writing immediately. Just listen, and once I've finished, write it into the chat. I'll read the sentence 3 times. Okay? So, had you not pointed it out, I never would have seen it. Second time. Had you not pointed it out, I never would have seen it. Had you not pointed it out, I never would have seen it. Okay. So please, if you like to get involved, write the sentence into the chat.
Yeah, you've got a few different versions of it.
So here is the sentence. And so you can see with some of the sentences that came in the chat there were a couple problems with things like the weak form of you. Had you not is quite difficult to hear. So how can we use this in the classroom? So 1, give the students a pen and paper and tell them to listen carefully. Read the sentence once clearly and ask them to jot down what they caught. So it's very important they're not listening and writing at the same time. You want them to focus on the meaning as much as the words. So you say it once and they write down what they caught. Then read the sentence again several times, allowing the students to write only after you have finished speaking. Now, we did it with a relatively short phrase here. In the classroom, you may choose to make it like quite a bit longer than the example I've given here. The stage we missed out from the example is the next one. Now allow students to compare in pairs, then in groups, working together to reconstruct the sentence. And here's where they're going to pick up on something I heard that you didn't. And they're going to repeat the sentence to each other, how they heard it. And they will say things, if we look at this example, things like the weak form of had you, and the would have instead of saying would have. These are the type of mistakes that they will find working in pairs or in groups and help each other with. Why is this something useful that we can use with errors? Critical thinking. Students need to use their critical thinking skills to piece together the passage. They must consider the meaning of the words and phrases they hear and how they fit into the overall context. So this very much, we're talking about a slightly longer structure here, of course. Collaboration. It promotes collaboration and peer learning. Students can discuss their ideas and work together to reconstruct the passage. Listening skills. It improves listening skills by requiring students to process spoken language and reproduce it accurately. This is particularly valuable for learners who may struggle with understanding spoken language and the nuances of connected speech, this, had you not? Adaptability. They can be adapted to different levels of proficiency and can be used in various contexts, making it a versatile tool for language teachers. It's great, again, for that formative assessment. If you've been looking at different third conditional structures, this is a nice way to test them with a sentence like this. And it's really, really quick and easy. You don't need anything to create an exercise like this. There is in the handout a link to an example of this. It's a really, really lovely video of a teacher using this in the classroom.
Yeah.
So just a little reflection on some of the things that we've spoken about today. What specific error correction methods or strategies discussed in the webinar resonate with your teaching style or current classroom challenges? How do you think implementing these error correction techniques will impact your students' language learning journey and becoming more autonomous, for example? Reflect on your own experiences as an EFL teacher. Are there instances where you wished you had employed a specific error correction approach discussed in the webinar? How might you have approached similar situations differently? And when will you next have the opportunity in your classroom to monitor your students' output and apply one of these techniques? Just a couple of questions there to reflect on.
That brings us to our conclusion. So just thinking that, remember that mistakes are a natural part of the development, okay? We want to, instead of treating it as a, something to be punished, what we're really doing is turning it into a learning opportunity, not least for the teacher, to learn what level their students are, if they're teaching, if the students are following what they're being taught, okay? Active learners, when we stop giving them the answers, they'll become more involved in their own learning process. I think, this is a theme of these series of webinars, to get students involved. Awareness, we're alerting students to the types of mistakes they make when they become more aware, which is crucial for self-involvement, improvement, sorry. Increased motivation too. Students want to be corrected. They know that their efforts are being assessed and corrected. It motivates them to pay more attention to language accuracy and put in the effort to improve. If you correct well and appropriately, then the students will improve, but they'll also enjoy it. They'll know they're actually learning stuff.
And as you said before, I think we're very used to correcting the writing pieces of our students, but less so their spoken production. And when they get used to being corrected in a particular way, they will begin to react very positively to it.
Anyway, let us know. You can either email us or let us know in the chat for suggestions of future webinars. Okay, we've got some planned, but we're always looking for new ideas. Thanks for your attention. As I said, you'll receive a certificate of participation and a handout with all this information and a lot more information too. Please let me know, email me if you don't get it, so I'll get that back out to you. Next week, our colleague Ruth is going to join me, and she's going to be talking about discussion activities and games for Cambridge B1 and B2 speaking exams. Not only, so if you're not doing Cambridge exams or you're not teaching B1 and B2, there's still great games that you can play. Okay? So I hope you'll join us again next week. Thanks a lot, everyone. Okay, it's been a pleasure. It's nice to be back. And hope to see you next week. And I'm sure we'll see Kathy in a few weeks.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Bye, everyone.